Hello. According to Common English Dictionary definitions, the word safeguard means simply to protect something, and also to protect someone from harm, damage, or personal loss. In terms of community care and social services in this country, the word has become the general term used to describe significant measures that are taken to ensure the upkeep of the health, well-being and human rights of vulnerable individuals. We will discuss existing legislations in more detail in a later lesson. Still, for guidance, the UK has the Care Act 2014 in place to provide a legal framework for protecting vulnerable adults, which assists local authorities in understanding their duties in this area. There are 6 primary principles in the Act. Protection. React appropriately when abuse is reported or suspected. Empowerment. Encourage people to make their own decisions. Accountability. Make all safeguarding roles and responsibilities clear. Prevention. Stop abuse by raising awareness. Proportionality. Assess any risks and situations reasonably. Partnerships. Work with other professionals and organisations to manage risks. It is important to remember that each of these principles is highlighted to not only provide protection for vulnerable adults, but also to respect their human rights and allow them to choose how they are supported. Forms of safeguarding should never descend to cases of a person being isolated unwillingly or having decisions constantly made for them, as it will then become a form of abuse in its own right. There are various ways in which a vulnerable adult can be exploited or abused. The most common examples of this include human trafficking. Individuals are recruited and transported to national or international locations where they are exploited for cheap labour and regarded as disposable resources. Domestic abuse. Individuals are subjected to continual physical abuse or threats to their well-being by a person known to them. This is often a family member or partner, but can also be a carer or friend. Modern slavery. Individuals are kept isolated from others and used purely by captors to work for little or no money, often forced to live in enclosed and unhealthy spaces. Systematic humiliation. Individuals are constantly derided and mocked for any differences, often in public environments. Aspects of human trafficking and modern slavery can be related to sex crimes, especially where the vulnerable adults affected are female. They can be coerced or threatened into enforced prostitution or other forms of sex work, which will be very much against their will or personal values. Young women can also be subjected to female genital mutilation, FGM, at these times. This is a procedure that is still practiced in some areas of Africa, Asia and the Middle East, but is a criminal act in the UK and other countries where authorities will actively safeguard against it. In addition to the earlier definition of a vulnerable adult, in this lesson there are likely to be specific and personal reasons why someone may be in serious need of external support. These could include such contributing factors as mental health problems, posing a risk to their own well-being and potentially other people, alcohol and drug-related issues, posing a risk to themselves and others with their actions and decision-making, physical disabilities or injuries, being more at risk to threats of violence and easier to isolate from others, homeless and destitute, being susceptible to emotional and physical harm or coercion, old age, being more easily intimidated or manipulated. No matter their circumstance, background or values, everyone has the right to feel safe in their own surroundings. This means that they should be able to live without constantly having to fear the actions of others, being free from any acts of abuse, neglect, humiliation or exploitation. In realistic terms, most local authorities or carers cannot take on the full responsibility of safeguarding adults by themselves. This is why they must commit to supporting close contacts with the police, the National Health Service, NHS, and other key organisations in the country. With this spirit of safety and cooperation, local authorities are advised to comply with several directives regarding safeguarding adults. They must commit to making immediate inquiries if a vulnerable adult is believed to be at risk of abuse or neglect, opening an official inquiry to determine if rapid action is required to stop abuse or neglect and who will take responsibility for it, set up a Safeguarding Adults Board, SAB, for regional investigations and escalation, arrange for independent bodies to represent an adult who is the subject of the safeguarding inquiry, contact and cooperate with all relevant organisations in order to protect adults on a national basis. Training is crucial when it comes to the effective safeguarding of vulnerable adults. Without the proper experience or knowledge, it is possible that symptoms of abuse or neglect can be missed. It will also be likely that some signs may be misread or misunderstood, leading to unfounded accusations and reputational damage. A careful balance must be maintained when it comes to safeguarding to ensure people's safety and to limit unnecessary harm to any innocent parties affected by it. 3 primary teaching points need to be included with any safeguarding training, and they arise from 3 important questions. They are: what type of abuse is thought to be taking place? It is important to know if a person is being manipulated, placed under mental stress, or suffering physical violence in order to act accordingly. Why is the adult in a situation where they are at risk? Understanding why a person is in a vulnerable category can help decide how to deal with the issue. Which signs of abuse, neglect, or exploitation have been seen? Verification of abuse can arise from behaviour changes or physical signs, such as scratches, malnutrition, bruises or broken bones. Sudden loss of property or wealth should also be considered. The main purpose of those 3 questions and the thinking behind them is that they will lead to a greater understanding of the needs and circumstances of a vulnerable adult. In turn, this will lead to more finely judged decisions on how to proceed with cases of suspected abuse or mistreatment. Appropriate activities will then lead to either the prevention of abuse or the immediate stoppage of it. In addition to those questions during safeguard training, 3 more factors should be covered. These must include priority for taking action. If a person is thought to be in significant harm or danger to life, they must be removed from the situation as quickly as possible. Following lawful practices. During all procedures, the appropriate legislation and protocol should be complied with fully. Understanding an individual's need. Each case should be treated as unique, as should the requirements of the vulnerable adult affected by it. Whilst the well-being of a vulnerable adult at risk should always be the primary concern of any investigation or process regarding safeguarding, it is important to remember that laws and policies are in place to protect their interests at all levels. Imagine the emotional impact on a vulnerable adult if a beloved carer or a favourite family member was denied permission to help them, mainly due to unsubstantiated rumours and ineffectual safeguarding. Obviously, the emphasis on preventing abuse in the first place is just as important. It is important to remember that signs of abuse, neglect and exploitation can be hidden from investigations in several ways. Any training should also cover this aspect, including instances where vulnerable adults deny cases of abuse to investigators due to being afraid of repercussions from their abuser, having low self-esteem or no confidence, being from overseas and unfamiliar with their location or laws, being reluctant to cause any disruption to their lifestyle, feeling embarrassed or inadequate. We may use the word abuse or neglect in many ways, but when it concerns the safety and status of vulnerable individuals, they have specific meanings. Abuse is a deliberate act that may involve sustained acts of cruelty or violence performed regularly or repeatedly. It can cause significant harm to an individual on either a physical or mental level. Neglect is essentially a form of abuse, but is generally restricted to a consistent failure to provide acceptable amounts of care and sustenance for dependent individuals. For anybody safeguarding a vulnerable adult, it is extremely important to remember that they may be subjected to different types of abuse. Some of these may result in visible symptoms, proving that sustained physical abuse is occurring. This could include such signs as a person claiming to have a sustained history of unexplained falls or accidents, frequent examples of bruises, burns, cuts or bone fractures, serious medical problems which go untreated, dramatic weight loss or lack of energy due to continued malnutrition or dehydration. A person can be subjected to sexual abuse if they are sexually assaulted, made to witness sexual acts unwillingly, or harassed in an inappropriate way. Unless this involves physical assault, symptoms of its presence may not be visibly seen. Instead, a victim will be prone to unexplained mood swings, changes in behaviour, disturbed sleep, extreme anxiety, and poor concentration levels. They may also be embarrassed or ashamed of activities in which they have been forced to participate in. As with cases of sexual abuse, adults subjected to severe forms of emotional abuse may not exhibit bodily symptoms or visible signs, but they could still be extremely distressed or upset by such behaviour as threatened violence, blackmail, manipulation, abandonment or humiliation. However, a victim of emotional abuse is highly likely to show at least one of these disorders: sudden changes in appetite, rapid and substantial weight loss, abnormally low levels of self-esteem, continued insomnia or poor resting habits, feeling of constant distress or anxiety, poor personal hygiene and self-care. If a vulnerable individual is being mistreated in their own home by a partner or family member, this is usually categorised as domestic abuse. This can still involve elements of physical, sexual and emotional abuse, but is differentiated by the setting and the perpetrators. The environment may allow for sustained abuse attacks and are often indicative of overwhelming, controlling or threatening characteristics in a person. A vulnerable person may be susceptible to discriminatory abuse if they have a characteristic to which an abuser responds negatively. This could be triggered simply by their lifestyle, beliefs, sexuality, ethnicity, appearance or disability. In any case, this can lead to signs which could be subtle or obvious in a given circumstance, so a carer should watch and listen for potential forms of hate crime. Repeat answers, so a carer comments based on a person's characteristics. Constant instances of intentional harassment or humiliation. Resources or treatments being unnecessarily withheld due to the personal traits of an adult. It's a sad fact of life that vulnerable adults are especially prone to financial abuse, where tricksters and criminals will extort money from them. This can manifest in fraudulent bills or cash amounts being sent to them via online means or a phone call. Some opportunistic scammers will even knock on a door and brazenly ask for money for non-existent services if a vulnerable person is alone. Banks will monitor for unusual transactions and withdrawals, but it is also best to check if a potential victim seems to be inexplicably short of funds at some point. As we have previously mentioned, neglect is a type of abuse in itself, but can have a devastating or potentially fatal effect on a vulnerable person. It is typified by the willingness to avoid providing or generally withholding the care, treatment, resources or nutrition that a person needs. This can often be evidenced by distinctive changes in a person's behaviour or appearance, such as states of malnutrition and dehydration, poor physical condition and hygiene, dirty clothes and unkempt living areas, isolation and social withdrawal, lack of lighting or heating at home, bills left unpaid or unattended. There is no standard profile for an abuser of vulnerable adults. However, many who commit abuse intentionally take advantage of a special relationship or privileged access to someone's property. This could include friends, relatives, partners or carers. It should also be noted that some forms of abuse can originate from good intentions. A family member without the right knowledge or resources could feasibly neglect or inadvertently abuse a person they care for without realising it. A significant percentage of those affected by domestic abuse are the elderly. According to Age UK, a leading charity organisation in this country, 280,000 people aged 60 to 74 experienced domestic abuse in the year 2019. This number could be susceptible to increases in the elderly population and the effects of the pandemic. However, abuse and neglect can affect the elderly in specific ways, such as unexplained malnutrition that isn't caused by illness, untreated injuries that are ignored, having sunken eyes showing poor circulation in the body, overly frequent visits to the hospital or doctors, lack of basic necessities such as food and water. The elderly, an age range considered to be anyone over 65, are at a higher risk of becoming vulnerable and needing support or care plans. This can be because many start to rely on others for basic care at this time, increasing the likelihood of abuse. Examples of this are often called cases of elder abuse. Realistically, they can occur in home and clinical surroundings. Statistically, there are subgroups of the elderly population that are most susceptible to being abused by others. This should be considered when care plans and supervisory practices are being arranged. Particular attention should be given to those who live alone and own their property, those who are homebound or have a physical disability, those over the age of 80, as they will be markedly frailer and less physically active, those that live in remote or isolated conditions which may prevent reports of abuse, those with dementia or mental health conditions. In some circumstances, an elderly person may become susceptible to self-neglect. This is a term given to the circumstances where a vulnerable adult adopts a lifestyle that puts their long-term well-being at significant risk. They may not eat, sleep, exercise, or maintain a sanitary environment. Without someone to guide and support them, this could lead to malnutrition, infection, or illness. Cases of elderly self-neglect can originate from a variety of causes. Some of these may be intrinsically linked to personal health conditions or mental health issues, both of which may be accelerated or worsened by the ageing process. However, severe instances of self-neglect can also arise from issues linked to brain trauma or head injuries, delusional disorders, incorrect or inappropriate drug dosage, vascular dementia or Alzheimer's disease. Stay with us for the next lesson. See you soon.